People don't just wake up one morning and decide to become a rat. It's not a career choice you find in a high school guidance counselor's office. The path to becoming a confidential informant, a snitch, a CI, whatever you want to call it, is almost always paved with desperation. It's a road you take when all the other roads are blocked. Maybe you're staring down a long prison sentence, a 20-year stretch that feels like a lifetime. The cops or the feds put a deal on the table. They tell you that you can help yourself. You can trade information for freedom, or at least a shorter time in a cage. It's a devil's bargain, a tempting offer when you're cornered and scared. The reasons are as varied as the people who make the choice. For some, it's pure self-preservation. They see the years ticking away and think about their kids growing up without them. They think about dying old behind bars. The loyalty they once had to their crew suddenly seems less important than their own skin. For others, it's about revenge. Maybe they were double-crossed by a partner or disrespected by a boss. Turning informant becomes a way to get even, to settle a score that couldn't be settled on the street. It's a cold, calculated move to bring down the people who wronged them, using the power of the law as their weapon. Then there's the money. Law enforcement agencies have budgets to pay their sources. It might not be a fortune, but for someone living from score to score, a steady stream of cash can be a powerful motivator. It can pay the rent, buy groceries, or fund a lifestyle that their legitimate work never could. This creates a strange kind of employment, a job where your success depends on the downfall of others, often people you call friends. The informant becomes a professional betrayer, selling secrets for a paycheck. It's a dirty business, but for some, the money washes away the grime, at least for a little while. Finally, some informants convince themselves they are doing the right thing. They might have been in the game for years, seen too much violence, too much pain. They grow a conscience, or at least something that looks like one. They start to believe that putting the bad guys away is a noble cause, that they are cleaning up the streets. This justification helps them sleep at night. It allows them to look in the mirror and see a hero instead of a traitor, but no matter the reason, fear, revenge, greed, or a newfound morality, the choice is always the same. It's a step into a world of shadows, a life where you belong to no one and trust no one. Curtis Martino was a man of two names and two worlds. To the cops, he was Curtis Dodd, a registered confidential informant with a file number. He was a source, an asset, a tool they used to build cases. In this world, he was quiet, observant, and reliable. He met his handler in nondescript cars, in deserted parking lots, or in drab government offices. He spoke in low tones, recounting conversations and detailing criminal plans with cold precision. He was their eyes and ears on the street, a ghost who moved through the underworld collecting its secrets. His handlers saw him as a necessary evil, a man whose treachery served the greater good of law and order. But on the streets of his neighborhood, nobody knew the name Curtis Dodd. There, he was Curtis Martino, or more often, REDRUM. The nickname was a mark of respect, a nod to his supposed ruthlessness and his fiery temper. He was 31 years old, but he carried himself with the authority of an older man. He was known as a mid-level operator, a guy who could move product, fence stolen goods, and connect the right people for the right price. He projected an image of a loyal soldier, someone who understood the code of the streets. You don't talk to the police, ever. His so-called friends saw a man who was tough, dependable, and always ready for action. This double life was a masterclass in deception, a performance that never ended. When he was REDRUM, Curtis had to live and breathe the part. He laughed at the right jokes, showed anger at the right insults, and mourned the fallen comrades he was secretly helping to put away. He had to remember every lie he told, every detail of the false persona he had constructed. The switch to Curtis Dodd, the informant, required a different kind of performance. He had to be careful not to reveal too much about his own involvement, to paint himself as a peripheral figure while delivering valuable intelligence. It was a constant, draining act of mental gymnastics. Living with two identities is like being two different people trapped in the same body. Each identity has its own rules, its own loyalties, and its own dangers. For Curtis, the line between REDRUM and Curtis Dodd became increasingly blurred. Sometimes the anger of REDRUM felt real. Other times the fear of Curtis Dodd was overwhelming. He was a man at war with himself, caught between the world he was betraying and the world that was using him. This internal conflict was the invisible price tag of his deal, a cost that was not measured in dollars or years off a sentence, but in the slow erosion of his own soul.
Perfect.
The life of an informant like Curtis Martino is a tightrope walk over a pit of fire. Every day is a test of nerve, a gamble with the highest stakes. A single misstep, a careless word, or a suspicious glance could mean a brutal and lonely death. Imagine going to a meeting with dangerous criminals knowing you are wearing a wire. Every beat of your heart sounds like a drum in your ears. You pray the battery doesn't die. You pray the signal is clear. You pray that the bulky device strapped to your chest doesn't press too visibly against your shirt. The sweat on your brow isn't just from the heat, it's the cold sweat of pure, unadulterated fear. The danger wasn't just in the big operations, it was in the small, everyday interactions. It was having a beer with a guy whose drug operation you had just detailed to your handler. It was looking his wife and kids in the eye, knowing you were the reason their world was about to come crashing down. Curtis had to constantly monitor his own behavior. He couldn't seem too eager to ask questions, or people would get suspicious. He couldn't know too much, or they'd wonder where he got his information. He had to be one of the boys, but he could never truly be one of them. This constant vigilance was exhausting, a mental marathon that never had a finish line. Paranoia becomes your closest companion. Curtis started seeing threats everywhere. Was that car parked across the street for too long? Was the guy at the end of the bar watching him too closely? Did his friend's question have a double meaning? He jumped every time his phone rang with an unknown number. He couldn't trust his friends because he was betraying them. He couldn't fully trust his handlers because he knew they saw him as disposable. He was completely and utterly alone, isolated by the web of lies he had spun around himself. This profound isolation is one of the heaviest burdens an informant carries. The risk extended beyond Curtis himself. It hung over anyone he cared about. If his secret came out, retaliation wouldn't be limited to him. Criminal organizations have long memories and a cruel sense of justice. They might go after his family, anyone who could be used to hurt him. This constant worry for the safety of loved ones adds another layer of torment to the informant's existence. He wasn't just gambling with his own life, he was gambling with theirs too. Every piece of information he passed on was another roll of the dice, another prayer that the consequences wouldn't land on the people he left behind. In the ecosystem of the streets, Curtis Martino, as REDRUM, had carved out a specific niche for himself. He wasn't a kingpin, not the one calling all the shots from a high-rise office. He was a street-level manager, a crucial link in the criminal chain. His business was logistics. He knew how to get things from point A to point B without attracting the wrong kind of attention. Whether it was a shipment of illegal firearms, a package of narcotics, or a truckload of stolen electronics, REDRUM was the guy who could make the arrangements. He had connections with truckers, warehouse workers, and corrupt officials who could be paid to look the other way. His reputation was built on a foundation of perceived reliability and a carefully managed temper. He was known to be fair in his dealings but unforgiving to those who crossed him. This persona was a shield. The stories of his ruthlessness, some true and some exaggerated, kept potential rivals at bay. He understood that in his world, respect was often just another word for fear. He would participate in low-level acts of violence to maintain his credibility, acts that pushed him deeper into the criminal life he was supposed to be helping to dismantle. He was playing a role, but the role required him to commit real crimes. The social fabric of REDRUM's world was woven with threads of camaraderie and suspicion. He spent his nights in smoky bars and late-night diners, surrounded by associates who called him a brother. They shared stories, drinks, and the spoils of their illicit activities. They attended each other's family barbecues and celebrated birthdays together. This created a twisted sense of belonging for Curtis. These were the people he was betraying, yet they were also the only community he had. He had to navigate these relationships with extreme care, sharing just enough of himself to seem genuine, but never so much that he exposed his true purpose. This life on the streets provided the perfect cover for his work as an informant. His position as a trusted middleman gave him access to a wide range of criminal activities. He was a fly on the wall in rooms where major deals were planned. He heard the whispers about who was feuding with whom, which crews were planning to hit which targets, and where the next big shipment was coming in. It was this access, this intimate knowledge of the underworld's inner workings, that made him so valuable to law enforcement. His life as REDRUM was the very thing that gave Curtis Dodd the information he needed to survive. The relationship between an informant and their handler is a delicate and complex dance. For me, my handler, a detective named Mike Valenti, was basically my only lifeline. Detective Valenti was the one person in the world who knew both of my identities. Our meetings were always clandestine, meticulously planned to avoid detection. Sometimes it was just a quick pass of a folded piece of paper in a crowded coffee shop. Other times it was a long debriefing in the back of an unmarked van parked in some industrial area late at night. In those meetings, REDRUM would fade away, and Curtis Dodd, the informant, would step up, delivering my report with this weird mix of fear and, professional detachment. My value came from the quality of my information. I didn't just toss out vague rumors, I delivered actionable intelligence. I'd map out the hierarchies of different criminal crews, pointing out the leaders, the enforcers, and the money men. I'd provide license plate numbers, addresses of stash houses, and the times and locations of planned drug deals. On several occasions I even agreed to wear a wire, capturing incriminating conversations that would honestly become the backbone of the prosecution's case. This was, hands down, the most dangerous part of my job. I was turning my own body into a piece of evidence, a walking, talking microphone for the police. My information led to a string of successful busts that were celebrated in the press as major victories in the war on crime. A large-scale gun trafficking ring was dismantled based on my intel. A series of warehouse robberies got stopped before they could even happen. Key figures in a narcotics distribution network were arrested in early morning raids, caught with their product and their cash. Each successful operation made me more valuable to the police, but man, it also cranked up the risk. With every arrest of someone I knew, the odds of someone putting the pieces together and identifying the snitch grew, exponentially. I was a hero to the cops, but a ghost who was creating more and more enemies. But, I also had to protect myself. I learned to play a strategic game with my handlers. Sometimes I'd hold back a piece of information, using it as leverage to negotiate for more money or better protection. I had to make sure I wasn't implicated in the crimes I was reporting, so I'd carefully frame the intelligence to keep myself on the periphery. An observer, not a participant. This was a dangerous balancing act. If I seemed too knowledgeable, the cops might start thinking I was a bigger player than I let on. But if I gave them too little, they might decide I was no longer useful. My survival depended on being the perfect informant, invaluable but deniable. Living a double life is not just a mental exercise, it is a slow-acting poison that seeps into every corner of your being. For Curtis Martino, the constant pressure began to take a severe psychological toll. The man known as REDRUM had to be confident and fearless, while the man known as Curtis Dodd lived in a state of perpetual anxiety. This internal contradiction created a deep fissure in his personality. He suffered from insomnia, lying awake for hours at night, replaying conversations in his head, searching for any mistake he might have made. The silence of his apartment was often filled with the imagined sounds of footsteps in the hall, or a car door slamming outside. The paranoia became a prison of its own. He could no longer enjoy simple moments of peace. A friendly pat on the back from an associate felt like a search for a wire. A casual question about his whereabouts felt like an interrogation. He began to drink heavily, not for pleasure, but to numb the constant fear and quiet the racing thoughts in his mind. The alcohol provided a temporary escape, but it also dulled his senses and made him careless. He knew that a single drunken slip of the tongue could get him killed, yet he couldn't stop seeking that brief moment of oblivion. His self-destructive behavior was a cry for help that no one could hear. The sense of guilt was another heavy burden. He was betraying men who, in their own twisted way, had shown him loyalty and friendship. He had shared meals with them, listened to their problems, and even offered them advice. Now, he was methodically orchestrating their ruin. He saw the faces of their children in his nightmares. He thought about the families he was destroying, the lives he was shattering, all to save his own. This guilt gnawed at him, making him question if his freedom was worth the devastation he was causing. He was a Judas, and the 30 pieces of silver he received from his handlers felt heavier with each payment. This psychological decay began to manifest in his behavior. He became more irritable and prone to unpredictable outbursts of anger, a trait that was useful for his REDRUM persona, but dangerous for his overall stability. His handlers noticed the change, seeing the strain in his eyes and the tremor in his hands. They worried he was becoming unstable, a liability who might crack under the pressure. The very qualities that made him a good informant, his ability to blend in, his sharp memory, his nerve, were being eroded by the life he was forced to lead. Curtis Martino was slowly being consumed by the two men he pretended to be. The information provided by informants like Curtis Martino is undeniably a powerful tool for law enforcement. It allows police to get inside criminal organizations in a way that traditional surveillance never could. Curtis's tips saved lives by preventing violent crimes. They took illegal guns off the street, stopping them from being used in robberies or gang wars. They disrupted the flow of narcotics, which not only hurt the criminals' bottom line but also reduced the harm that drugs inflict on communities. From the perspective of the police and the public, the use of informants is a necessary strategy that produces tangible results. Cases are closed, criminals are convicted, and a measure of order is restored. However, this tool is a double-edged sword, and its use comes with significant costs and ethical complications. To maintain his credibility, Curtis had to continue participating in criminal activities. He couldn't just stand on the sidelines and take notes. He had to be involved. This means that law enforcement, by using him as an informant, was implicitly sanctioning a certain level of crime. They were allowing smaller offenses to occur in the hope of preventing larger ones. This creates a moral gray area. Where do you draw the line? How many small crimes are acceptable in the pursuit of a bigger bust? It's a question that has no easy answer. Furthermore, the reliance on informants can sometimes lead to a perversion of justice. An informant has a strong incentive to provide information, whether it is true or not. A desperate informant might embellish details or even fabricate stories to make themselves seem more valuable to their handlers. They might point the finger at a rival for personal reasons, settling a score under the guise of helping the police. This can lead to wrongful arrests and convictions, where innocent people are punished based on the word of a compromised source. The system puts an immense amount of trust in individuals who have already proven themselves to be untrustworthy. The consequence for Curtis himself was the complete loss of a normal life. He had traded his future for a reprieve from prison. He could never go back to being a regular citizen. Even if he survived his time as an informant, he would always be looking over his shoulder. He would have to leave his home, change his name, and disappear into the witness protection program, a gilded cage where he would be safe but forever disconnected from his past. The price of his information was his identity, his community, and his peace of mind. He had helped law enforcement win some battles, but in the process, he had lost the war for his own life. The life of an informant is a race against time, and time was running out for Curtis Martino. The world he had so carefully balanced on a knife's edge was beginning to tilt. A series of high-profile arrests, all involving criminals he was close to, started to create a pattern. People on the street began to talk. They knew there was a rat in their midst. The paranoia that had once been Curtis's private torment was now a shared suspicion within his crew. Eyes followed him everywhere he went. Conversations would stop when he entered a room. The friendly backslaps were gone, replaced by cold stares and pointed silence. The breaking point came from an unexpected place. It wasn't a slip-up by Curtis or his handler. It was a legal document, a piece of discovery evidence turned over to a defense attorney. Buried deep within thousands of pages of reports was a single sentence that described a confidential source who was present at a specific meeting. The details were just specific enough for a sharp-eyed lawyer and his client to connect the dots. The client, a man now facing a long sentence, realized there was only one person who fit the description: his old friend, REDRUM. The secret was out, not with a bang, but with the rustle of a legal paper. The news spread through the underworld like wildfire. The name Curtis Martino, once associated with respect and fear, was now synonymous with the dirtiest word on the street: snitch. His death warrant was signed. There was no trial, no appeal. The code of the streets is simple and brutal when it comes to informants. His former friends became his hunters. There was nowhere for him to run where they wouldn't look for him. His home, his old haunts, the places where he once felt powerful, were now traps. The city that had been his kingdom had become his hunting ground. His handler, Detective Valenti, tried to pull him out. They had a plan, an emergency protocol for just this scenario, but it was too late. Curtis, in a state of panic and denial, hesitated for a day too long. He thought he could talk his way out of it, that he could somehow manage the situation as REDRUM. But REDRUM was dead, and only Curtis Dodd, the marked man, remained. The walls he had built between his two lives came crashing down, burying him in the rubble. His double life had reached its inevitable, violent conclusion, a stark reminder that in the world of crime and betrayal, secrets are a currency that eventually comes due. The story of Curtis Martino did not end with a headline or a public trial. It simply faded into the silence of the streets. He disappeared. No one ever found a body, which only added to his legend. Some whispered that his police handlers got him safely into witness protection, that he was living a new life somewhere under a new name. Others, the ones who knew the streets better, were certain he had met a much grislier fate, his body lying in an unmarked grave or at the bottom of a river. The ambiguity of his end was a fitting postscript to a life lived entirely in the gray areas between truth and lies. The impact of his choice reverberated long after he was gone. For law enforcement, he was a success story. The cases he helped build resulted in dozens of convictions, crippling several criminal organizations. He was a ghost in their machine, a confidential source number in a closed file, a testament to the effectiveness of using insiders to fight crime. His handler, Detective Valenti, would look at the convictions on the wall and feel a mix of pride and regret. He had cleaned up the streets, but he had used a man's life as the cleaning rag, and he knew that the man had likely been thrown away in the end. For the community he betrayed, his name became a cautionary tale. It was a lesson taught to young, aspiring gangsters about the dangers of trusting anyone. His betrayal sowed seeds of distrust that poisoned relationships for years to come. The name REDRUM was no longer spoken with respect but with contempt. He became a boogeyman, a symbol of the ultimate violation of their code. His legacy was not one of fear or power, but of deceit. He had proven that even the most trusted soldier could be a serpent, and this knowledge made their violent world even more treacherous than it already was. In the final analysis, the life of Curtis Martino is a profound tragedy. He was a man who tried to escape one trap by walking directly into another. He made a deal to save himself, but in doing so, he lost himself completely. The choice to become an informant is a choice to live in a permanent state of exile. Exiled from your community, exiled from your past, and ultimately, exiled from your own identity. Curtis Martino's story is a stark illustration of the human cost of the war on crime, a reminder that the shadows where these battles are fought are often where souls go to die, leaving behind nothing but a mysterious case and a name whispered in the dark.